I actually briefly started in sub A, but I'd been to kindergarten at Springfield Convent. So my sisters went to Springfield Convent, and somehow my parents arranged for me to go to kindergarten there. And so then I showed up at SACS in sub A, but I'd learned to read and write at Springfield Convent. And so somehow, I don't know on what basis, but somehow they put me into sub B. So I kind of skipped sub A and went straight into sub B. And so there were like two interesting things about that. First of all, my dad used to refer to me as a Springfield old girl, but the other side of it was I was kind of always a bit younger than the rest of the class in a way, and so I always felt like, well, I don't know if I even really felt it at the time, but I was sort of like maybe a little bit behind the rest of the class as a result of having skipped that first year. So this was like an interesting, when I look back on it, maybe it would have been better for me not to skip that first year and kind of be with people of my own age, sort of thing. So I was like, August was when I was born. So I was sort of at the early end of the year, so to speak. So I think I was, maybe there were other people of a similar age, but anyway, this is sort of something I remember. So yeah, so this was my start at SACS. I felt like I fitted in quite easily. I don't feel like I sort of distinguished myself in any way, but I sort of felt like it was quite easy for me. The thing I kind of remember was playing marbles on the playground, and maybe the most interesting thing I remember, there was a guy by the name of he was a boarder, and I think his name was Norman.
Norman
And Norman Bain, that's exactly right. And the thing I remember, the biggest event, was one day Norman Bain showed up with like this goddamn big, cannonball. And he put this thing up, and he sort of said, "Shy up here." And like you had to like stand right at the other side of the playground, and people like hurling guns at this thing. And finally someone hit it quite early on, and Norman was like outraged because he'd lost his cannonball. So anyway, this is like a really these are the kind of things that I remember from. So anyway, so I guess I have like pretty good memories of the junior school, but nothing really sticks out, nothing really carried with me. Probably the ones that sort of stick out in most people's minds are, there was this like Westhazen and another couple, who was sort of a little bit, well, not so, they were kind of authoritarian and like to kind of cane people. And, I've seen talk about this on Facebook and so on. And so there was this kind of streak in the school. But, I feel like I wasn't really, subject to that kind of discipline, and so I don't know, I kind of went through it unscathed.
No.
So the one thing when talking about Westhazen, I actually joined the gym. I was in like the gym team kind of thing, and so this is one of the things that I remember also. And they were just like a smallish group, and I used to go to gym, and Westhazen was like in charge of the gym, and so I had this kind of interaction with him then. And, he wasn't all that bad, and so maybe this like softened my view of him, and I guess the other person who sticks out a little bit was Jobert, and he wasn't this authoritarian. And actually it was an interesting thing because so Jobert had this class like on the other side of the rugby field with like the junior boarding school or something. And so I had to like walk across there to go to, 3B or whatever it was. And somehow Jobert quite liked me, I think. So I was like, okay, in his class. But now the thing that I really remember from that class is, so then on one occasion, there was like a teacher trainee, like a young woman who came as like the teacher, like from the training school or something. She was like going to teach us for a couple of lessons. And so I don't know what got into this woman's head, but on one day she happened to tell us, perhaps she thought if she like divulged her soul, we would like her or something. But anyway, she told us that she was scared of moths. And so the very next time, maybe the very next day that she was going to teach us, Mark Widston, I'm sure it was Mark Widston, he showed up in class and he had this like a sort of shoebox. And so then he like got up out of his desk and said, "Oh, by the way, miss, I'd like to show you something." And he like opened up the shoebox and all these moths flew out. Oh my God, like what pandemonium resulted. This teacher was like in tears and went, sort of went and like brought Jobert back in again. And he was like, "You boys are going to get it, So anyway, this was another good memory that I have of junior school.
That's funny.
So then I always lived in Kenilworth. Actually, it's kind of maybe a little bit of an aside, but prior to me anyway, my parents lived in Wynberg, in these flats in Wynberg. It wasn't all that great a kind of a place as far as I know. And then at some point, my parents, they won the Rhodesian sweep. So maybe you remember there was the Rhodesian sweep. And I don't know that it was like a huge amount of money, but anyway, they won the Rhodesian sweep. And so they used that money to buy a house in Kenilworth. So this was like a bit of a upgrade, from this kind of more or less, low rent area in Wynberg. So then they had this house in Kenilworth, and that's where I was born and grew up. And so then I used to catch the bus, and there were those kind of old like yellow and green buses, and you used to get on at the back, and there was like a sort of a pole there, and you could like hop on. And then you had to have like a penny or something to pay. And the conductor had these kind of things, and he would like put the penny in there and like press a knob or something, and you'd get a ticket. And so, okay, you would, take the bus. And so this is kind of what I remember. I started off on the bus and then would walk up from the bus stop in Newlands, I even forget the name. Yeah. And past like that little Indian place on the left there where you could go in and buy, various sort of cheap things. And so I used to walk up. And so then anyway, so I caught the bus for a while, and then I got a bicycle at some point. And so from then on, I used to go by a bicycle. But maybe that was only from when I was at the senior school. Maybe the whole of the junior school experience, maybe I caught the bus. So yeah, this was sort of my route to school and back.
Awesome.
I have I sort of felt like quite, I didn't feel like I really sort of distinguished myself or anything. I just like kind of went with the flow. But maybe they're kind of like maybe three things that stand out in my mind from high school. And maybe they were sort of a bit later, but anyway, one of them was Mariki Basson, and so she was a bit of an unusual character, and she kind of almost didn't really belong in that environment. But I felt like the stuff that she was teaching us was like a bit, funky, but overall I really liked her kind of thing. And so she kind of left a positive impression with me, and I was sort of impressed with the fact that even though she wasn't like a city slicker, she was still kind of, I don't know, had some value to her, and added value to my education. So this was maybe the one like academic thing. And then on the other side of things, there were two really nice experiences I had. One of them was I joined the band, and you were in the band as well. And for me, the band was like it was somehow maybe my most interesting and formative experience at high school. And of course, Johnny Ince was, running the band with some other people. And this was a really great experience for me because I was sort of like somehow a bit, like a bit more prominent in this band than I was in the normal kind of school. And so this was like a nice experience for me. And then, of course, I was like the drummer, and I went through the junior band and the senior band. And then, of course, when I got to the senior band, I was in there for 2 years, one as a regular drummer and one as like the solo drummer. And on both of those occasions, and I think you were there both times, we led the rag procession. And oh my God, this was an exciting event. And the most exciting thing was the drum majorettes that were like right ahead of us. And then we had to like counter march with the drum majorettes. And so they would come walking down between us, oh, like this was for me, like the most fantastic experience of my life almost, up until that point. So this was a big moment for me. And Johnny Ince was like a great guy, and that, it's like almost a cliche now. I'm sure like so many people were influenced by him, but he really did influence me. He sort of, somehow I was in history B2 or something, and somehow even then he started to somehow made me feel like I was sort of had something, that was worthwhile. And so this was a fantastic, it's incredible how many lives that guy touched, but he certainly touched mine, and I'm sure many others, So this was like this whole Johnny Ince and the band was like a really nice experience. It was an incredible talent that he had. And somehow, he did it in a way and I think it was sort of sincere. It wasn't like he was just putting it on, So, I think it only works if it really is sincere. And somehow he had that, he had that capacity to like touch people's lives and be aware of what they were doing, So this really was, and suddenly there's someone who you respect, and that person that you respect is telling you, hey, watch out, and so this has a big impact compared to the people you don't respect. And, it's okay, well, say what you want, Exactly. So then, so then the other, like, there are a couple of other sort of band experiences that sort of stand out in my mind. And so I don't know if maybe you don't know, but I sort of actually went to the boarding school in Standard 7. Because I was going to go to St. Andrews, and then I didn't go to St. Andrews. And then my parents said, okay, well, you can go to, the SACS boarding school. So I went to the boarding school in Standard 7. And by some kind of fluke, once as a standard in Standard 7, I became a fag. You maybe heard of the word fag, right? So I became a fag. And then there was like, I was the fag to this guy, C.J. Morrison. And I hardly even knew him, but he was like the star of the rugby team, I think. He was like the, I don't know, the fly half or something.
Scrum half.
And so, scrum half. Okay, so thanks.
Stanley LeBrun was
so anyway. Okay. So anyway, C.J. Morrison like they had like a room in Michaelis. And Rosedale. It was C.J. Morrison and
was it Rosedale?
Rosedale. Sorry, yeah. So, and they had a room like at the one end of the corridor, and CJ was in the one bed, and next to him there was like another prefect. And actually, so I was somehow I got to be I don't know, randomly I got to be C.J. Morrison's fag. Although I hate to almost use that word now because it's like got a bit of a negative connotation. But anyway, there was nothing about that, Yeah. I was just his fag, and then the fag for the person next to C.J. Morrison was Simon Sloan, and Simon Sloan was in the band actually. And so, okay, but first of all, I was the fag for C.J. Morrison. So I thought, okay, like, now I've really reached some like, some sort of high level of recognition in society, and I would clean his goddamn rugby boots, But anyway, then I met Simon Sloan, and Simon was in the band, and okay, like, I could like do the drums, but Simon Sloan was a gifted drummer, and he still is, and that's why he kind of connects with Peter Barnett, But anyway, so I kind of became friendly with Simon Sloan for that early period, and it really was him actually who suggested that I like try out for the band, So I got into the band in that way. But then Simon was like so good that he was like in the senior band, for his entire 4 years or something like that, and I only eventually got there, when I got to Standard 9. So and then maybe the other like piece about the band was there was a friend of mine, well, someone who was in the year behind me or behind us, Doug Jamison actually, and so I was in the band and I was a drummer, and then Doug Jamison wanted to be a drummer, and so he came into the band, and so we were kind of together in a way as drummers as we went through, and he sort of like somehow followed me, and And so maybe the good story actually is that I was like, okay, so finally I got to be solo drummer, and Doug Jamison was like one of the regular drummers in Matric, and Graham Boxall was the sergeant major, or, yeah, the drum major, yeah, or yeah, the drum major, right? So okay, Graham Boxall was out there, the lead, and so Doug Jamison and Graham Boxall were good friends, and I was sort of like brought into this in a limited way. So I was also kind of friendly with Graham, and then so then when we did like the cadet, the whole the remembrance ceremony or whatever, where the kind of Commem Day, yeah. So then we had to do like this special thing in the band, and so it was like conventional for like the lead drummer to kind of come up with something and do that as a special like little moment in the ceremony. But I didn't really have that in me to kind of come up with this thing. But Doug Jamison was like a more like entrepreneurial and sort of innovative guy, and he came up with like a sort of a drum solo that he had created. So he said to me, "Okay, you play this." And then Graham Boxall was going to like announce this, and I was going to play it, and maybe the other drummers were also going to play it, but Doug Jamison actually did, created the whole thing. But then, I felt, well, like this is a bit bad, because I'm like doing this, and Doug Jamison kind of created this thing, and so then I don't quite know how we decided this, but we told Graham Boxall that when he announces this thing, he should announce it Little Jammy. And I don't know if you remember, but Doug Jammy was like a small guy, and so by calling this thing like Little Jammy, it was almost like calling it Doug Jamison, but sort of sounded like it was mine, So somehow between us, we reached this agreement, and Graham Boxall at some point like announced, Little Jammy, play, and we played this thing. And so, another kind of a nice little story where, we kind of all work together, kind of try to take care of each other's sort of feelings and roles and so on. So this is another nice band story.
Fantastic.
And okay, so then I've got one more sort of school story maybe I can
This is
talk about.
John, this is lovely. Go.
No. And so the other story is at some point I met Tony Frost. Maybe Tony Frost, his name has come up, and he wasn't around that long, but maybe it was even while I was in boarding school. I sort of got interested in running. Like I started off, I had to play rugby, and when I played rugby at school, I sort of started off as hooker, actually, because I was kind of small in the early days. I started off as hooker, and then I thought, oh my God, like I don't want to be in this goddamn scrum. So next thing I was like flank, and then I was like center, and finally I was like wing, as far away from the kind of action as I could get, So okay, I didn't like excel in rugby, but I quite liked the idea of running, and so I remember it was like in these early days when running became popular, and maybe the Munich Olympics had just happened in 1972, and I got myself like a pair of München running shoes, which were like the New Balance running shoes, kind of like pretty nice new shoes. And I think I was in the anyway, I started running, and and Tony Frost was like the teacher who would lead the running group. And so we would like meet up, at the top of the school there, and then Tony Frost would be there, and a few other of us, all in our kind of shorts and that. And then we'd run up, and then into Newlands Forest, and then along the paths in Newlands Forest. And wow, this was like a fantastic experience for me. And for many years I continued running, and I ran like marathons and so on. But somehow running on that, the slopes of the mountain in the winter especially, was an incredible experience, and if I think back on that, I just think how lucky I was to live in this like privileged way, where I almost had the run of the mountain, and like well, maybe it's a bit early, but if I think on my life now, and and having lived in the US and been to China and all over the world, and I just think of how incredibly privileged I was, and I hardly knew it, at the time, But anyway, so I guess looking back, I've had like some pretty nice experiences at both the junior school and the high school. So I also had a good connection with Doug Brown, actually. So I tried to I don't know if you recall, but there was this Doug Brown at some point came up with this idea that you could submit your like poem or something, and then he would decide if it was good enough, and it would get posted in the library or something. So then people could like look, walk by there and sort of, oh, okay, look at whose poem's being put up there. So I kind of like Doug Brown, and I kind of thought maybe I could be, like a writer or something. I don't know. I kind of thought at the time that could be an interesting thing. So at one point I tried to write like a haiku, and I wrote this haiku. It was on like a little piece of paper like this. I like handed it in, to Doug Brown along with all the others, and it came back, and it was sort of something like, "Oh, very good, but not suitable for the board," so it never made it up on the board. But anyway, I have a pretty nice, a pretty good memory of Doug Brown. He also kind of made a kind of a connection with me, and I don't know, sort of gave me some feel about life that I didn't get from others. I remember, for example, him standing up in class, in English, and saying, oh, he chose one of the Setwork books, and he waited until like the end of the year, because he felt like the chances of the boys in the class having falling in love was higher because they were a bit older by the end of the year. And so he liked to wait until the end of the year to like introduce this book that sort of was about love and that kind of thing. And I sort of thought, oh my God, like I haven't fallen in love, I'm like missing out somehow, and but anyway, I think I still enjoyed the book, and probably I'll learn something from it. So yeah, it's a good point. Doug Brown was a cool guy. Well, I mean, maybe I can sort of cut to the chase, but okay, I went to UCT. Oh, well, I went to the Army first, and I went from like July to July. So it was sort of like a 2-year period, but I went for 1 year. And, oh, okay, so there, maybe, I don't know if this is a big thing, but I was sent as an infantryman to Uppington. So that's why I started. Like I got on the train, I went to Uppington, and by some chance, actually, so I actually, in my earlier years, I was living in Kenilworth, and Peter Barnett lived just up the road in Kenilworth. And by some, I don't quite know how it happened, but anyway, I kind of got to know Peter Barnett, and on occasion I would go with him and go and swim in his swimming pool, like after school, while I was sort of in the junior school. So I knew Peter quite well. And then, I don't know, at some point, I didn't really know him that well anymore. But when I got to Uppington, by some fluke, Peter Barnett was there. And I think we were kind of in the same tent, for a week or so. But anyway, then, these like the selection committee for the Parabats came along, So they like flew in like a Dakota, landed, and all these kind of guys got out, and they sort of had this table there. And so they said, okay, who of you want to join the Parabats, So before I'd finished school, actually, a friend of mine, his brother had been in the Parabats, and I'd heard all these stories from this brother, and I thought, oh my God, that sounds like really, like a really hardcore thing, So anyway, the selection committee arrives, and we're all still in our kind of like civvies, and like I got this brown collar, this like soiled collar, from being in the same shirt for like a whole week. Anyway, the selection committee, they say, okay, all you guys who want to, be part of us, they say, okay, you see that like pylon over there in the distance? okay, run around that pylon and back again, So, okay, we all like go around the pylon and come back. But, I'd like done all this cross country running, so I could run fairly well. So I like did pretty well in the running. And then, they, I don't know, they came and like asked us some questions. Anyway, by some fluke, I got accepted, so I left Peter in Uppington and I went to Bloemfontein. And so I did this parachute thing, which was quite a nice experience because, it was, we sort of thought that we were like special and we were kind of given, nice food, and we were trained, and did these like parachute jumps. And so this was quite a nice sort of experience. But anyway, then I went, then after that, I went to UCT and, I sort of.
Before you go there, sorry. So you did the Parabats thing?
Yeah, I did it. Yeah, I did it. Yeah, it was kind of fun.
Sorry, I mean, just a sec. I mean, that was a hectic thing.
Yeah, it was quite a ordeal, to do it. And so then you had to do this like training. So so they had this like for the actual training, they had this like 2 weeks of like a 2-week physical training. So it was like called like the PT course. So for 2 weeks, well, basically for 5 days and then 5 days, you did like PT all day, So you had to like, you were all in your uniform and you had to like do like scarp dra, and you had to like give it a pole, and you had to like run out and, come back with this pole, and, sit ups and push ups and all sorts of physical training, every possible thing you can think of, more or less for 2 weeks, And at the end of this, you had to do these like tests, and there was like this wall, this concrete wall, and you just had to like run at this wall and like try and get over the wall. All these things are supposedly kind of preparing you to go on the actual parachute training course. So somehow I made it out of this this physical training thing, and so then we had like 3 weeks of parachute training. And so this was again like a whole lot of different drills, and there was this like hangar up at the top of the Bloemfontein sort of military base, and a lot of this training took place in this hangar. And then they had this kind of, they called it the ARPKAS, which is like the ape box or something, I don't know. And it was like this thing that was about 3 stories up above the ground, and you had to kind of go up this ladder to get to this ARPKAS. And they had like a sort of a foofy slide that went from this ARPKAS across this field. And so apparently this ARPKAS was just like positioned at the height where, there's like a sort of a psychological height that if you're above that, you're hardly aware of the ground. But if you're at that height, then suddenly you're aware that the ground is there. And this ARPKAS was like positioned at sort of exactly this kind of psychological height. So the idea was if you could jump out of the ARPKAS, on this foofy slide, then you would be able to jump out of a regular plane. So anyway, we jumped out of this ARPKAS and then eventually, got to do this kind of go up in this Dakota and jump out of the Dakota. So yeah, it was quite an exciting thing. And actually, so because I did this this parachute training, so then of course, they had these like, well, probably I should have done 18 months. I don't know if you remember, you could like extend from 12 months to 18 months and be done. But I thought, okay, I just want to get out of this thing. I want to get back to civilian life. So I just did 12 months. So then I became eligible for these damn camps, and so I got involved in quite a few of these camps. And often they would happen over Christmas, because that's when, the kind of the university crowd were on holiday. So we'd like get into like a train, in Cape Town, and go all the way up to, Ondongwa, and those kind of places. And so I used to go on these camps up there, and I actually had like some quite interesting experiences. We sort of went up into Angola one time with the recce's, and had like some minor skirmishes, So anyway, some quite interesting experiences. So this was also like a kind of I mean, like hardly, but at one point, we went on this like one long kind of like a 10-day sort of recce up into Angola from northern Namibia, and And so there were some recce's with us. We were like we volunteered, so some of the parabats went with the recce's to kind of, give them a bit more people in their kind of in this sort of extended platoon kind of thing. And so then we like walked up into Angola, and then, so then on one occasion, we would sort of walk during the day and then like stop in the evening, and you'd form a circle, like all looking out. And I remember like on one occasion sort of stopping in a circle, maybe it was quite early in the day, and forming this sort of this perimeter. And then what they would always do is they would like choose a small little group, 4, 5, or 6 people to kind of go and walk the perimeter and kind of check to make sure, everything was okay. And so somehow I got, selected to go on this little perimeter kind of, recce. And there was like a corporal who was leading this thing, and then it was me and a few other people behind him. So then we like start walking out, and at some point, we start to think, this guy is not like walking around this thing. He's like walking out into the damn bush, So we start to say, hey, like go around and sort of go around the, the perimeter. But anyway, while this was happening, all of a sudden we like look out there, and there was sort of some, I don't know whether it was SWAPO or FAPLA or, whatever those, but I mean, they had military uniforms on. And so suddenly we see like a few people like out there. So the next thing, the guy, the corporal, at least he had the sense to like drop, so we were like drop down. People start firing at this, like I don't know what they could see. They start firing, and then at that point, we couldn't have been that far from the main sort of like group, because at that point, some like sergeant major in the recce group, he sort of jumped on this mortar and started like firing mortars out of the middle of this ring, and they like started landing the other side of this where we thought these guys were. So I'm sure these guys just like ran, And anyway, so after that, we were all like, highly, I was like the most alive I've ever felt in my life, And so then after that, we like find our way back, because now we knew where the sort of perimeter was. So we find our way back there, everyone's eyes, like wide open kind of thing. And so anyway, so this was like, but that was, the limit of, it wasn't like a pitched battle or anything like that. But yeah, it's kind of, I guess it's sort of fun to think back on that, but I wasn't.
That is a
so
head going in for sure. Wow.
Okay, so and I promise you, I'm just telling you the unvarnished truth here. I'm not like making this up. So, okay, so maybe you remember there was at some point like Rhodesia was about to go to Zimbabwe, and Rhodesia were like about to hand over to Zimbabwe, and so somehow I was on a camp at that time. And so they said to us, okay, you're parabats, so then we want you to go up into Rhodesia in case things like get out of control. So, and maybe you even remember at the time there was talk about like South African troops up in Rhodesia, and they shouldn't have been there. And people said they, anyway. So we were up like in the northern Transvaal. We like stopped at this kind of base there. They gave us all Rhodesian kit. We had our own rifles, and we drove up into Rhodesia, and there was like this big airfield, and we were sort of camped around this airfield. And so then there were some helicopters there, and we were sort of part of this like rapid reaction fire force, So then the idea was we'd all just be like hanging out there, and then you'd sort of be on like standby, a certain group of people, and if something happened, then they would like, call, and you all like jump into the helicopters and you fly off, and you kind of take care of whatever happens, So nothing much happened until there was this, we were like on standby, and there was this kind of this talk about, some people were handing in their weapons, and there was some concern, so okay, they called us out. So we all like jump into these 2 helicopters, and they just had 2 helicopters and sort of 2 kind of platoons of soldiers. But then in the one helicopter was, I think his name was Jan Breitenbach. And you've heard of Breitenbach, the famous poet, right? Is that right? So anyway, he had a brother, maybe like a step brother or something, who was like Jan Breitenbach. And he was like a famous kind of war leader, in South Africa. And so he was in the helicopter that I was in. And then in this other helicopter, there was like this American called Major Murphy. And he had been in Vietnam and sort of been like a Green Beret, and so he was like a sort of a, one of these kind of people looking for war, so he found his way somehow into the South African Pathfinders or something. So he was in the other helicopter. So, okay, the two helicopters, we take off, we go up, we sort of see, oh, there's some people down there. We like fly around. So then nothing really happened, so then they say, okay, we're going to go back to the airfield, where we left. So, but then the rain, the clouds started coming down, the rain started, falling, and suddenly, these helicopters didn't know, they couldn't see. So luckily they find like a river, and they kind of more or less know where this river's leading to Lake Kyle. So, okay, so now we're in these two helicopters flying down this river, and finally they emerge on Lake Kyle. So now that we're on Lake Kyle, they sort of know where they are, but they can't kind of see further than the lake itself. So now they're sort of looking for one of these, exits from Lake Kyle to kind of follow the river that was sort of going down. And then they knew they could get from there to this airfield where we were based. So then they didn't know which of these kind of exits to take. So they like flew around the perimeter, and then they'd fly up one of these, the sort of the tributaries coming into the lake. They'd fly up and then see, oh, it's wrong, and like turn, like whack, come back down again, so back down onto the lake, and then up another one, and coming back down again. And so this was all quite exciting, and the clouds were down. We like thought, oh my God, will we ever get out of here? And so then eventually they kind of couldn't find their way, down past the dam, to find their way back to this airfield. So they decided, okay, well, we just have to land because it's getting dark now, So then they go to like some side bar of the lake there, and they try and find this kind of relatively like flat open area. And so then the helicopters kind of come down like this now, trying to land. And it's quite forest, it's like a bit of a forest around there with bushes and everything. And so then, and the doors we were in the back of the helicopter, the doors are open, you can like look out, rain, and so then there's this tree across there, and it's sort of in the way, because there's big blades going around. So this one little sort of staff sergeant jumps out, and he goes and like shoots, the trunk of the tree, and like pushes the tree down. So, okay, now maybe this thing can land. And in the meantime, like the rotor at the back is like chopping, some of the kind of trees and that at the back. Anyway, eventually we kind of land in these two helicopters on this like sort of side spur of the Lake Kyle. And so okay, then finally, we made it, we land. Nothing happened. So then we have to like spend the night in this goddamn helicopter. We're just like soaked. We're just like sitting there, trying to sleep. There's this Jan Breitenbach over there, Major Murphy in the other one. So anyway, so we spend the night, and then the next morning they figure out only one of the helicopters can actually fly. The other one's like, damaged so badly it can't fly. So then they have to like ferry us, out. So we all get into half of us get into the one helicopter that can fly, and we take off. And then by some miracle, we land at the sort of, there's like a little settlement at the head of this Lake Kyle. There's this dam wall, like a little settlement. And so we land just next to the settlement. And actually it was Christmas morning. By some like miracle, it was Christmas morning. And so they say, oh, come with us. So we like get out of the helicopter and we walk over, and there's like a little sort of a very nice little house in this, this grass and this trees and this really nice house. And we go into this house, and it's this Rhodesian kind of this older Rhodesian couple who live in this house. And, they say to us, oh, thanks for what you're doing for Rhodesia, have a seat. So we sit down in this like fantastic, comfortable, couches and chairs and that. And the woman, she brings us like tea and Christmas cake. And so there we like eat tea and Christmas cake. And then, okay, well, thanks very much. We'll go get back into the helicopter, and they take us back to the airfield. So this was like a nice sort of a nice ending to a bit of a nervous experience. So anyway, that's it. That's the end of my
incredible. That is incredible.
So
how did you get?
Actually, the real truth is, I always felt I was sort of a bit of a softie. That's how I felt. I felt like I'm a bit of a softie. And so I felt I've got to do something to try and toughen myself up. That was sort of how I felt to be. And that sort of, that was really what I kind of thought. I thought, okay, if I do that, then, I'll be tough enough for life. That was sort of why I did it, I guess. Yeah. So, okay, so then I can, somehow it was preordained. My parents just thought I'm going to university. I just thought I'm going to university. And my mother, I think, had it in her mind that I should be a doctor. So I applied for medical school, but I didn't get accepted, So then apparently there was this, okay, well, you can do a BSc, and if you do well enough, you can get into medicine. So, okay, I tried to do, a BSc, but for me, to be brutally honest, I didn't really even know what to do when I got to first year UCT. I was sort of like, I was like, I don't know, I just wasn't really academically prepared in a way. And I was doing, I was into sport and all that, and I failed my first year, rather than, blast through and get into medicine, I failed my first year. So anyway, somehow I got back into second year, and I kind of did chemistry, because you take chemistry to go into, medicine. So, okay, I was in chemistry. So I took chemistry, and I ended up doing like a master's in physical chemistry. And, but then along the way, I started to think to myself, well, what the hell can I do with this chemistry thing? And I was aware of these like chemical engineers, and some of them were coming into chemistry. And so then I thought, oh, chemical engineering, that sounds like the real thing, So I started taking some courses in chemical engineering, actually. And at that point, Gary Folds, maybe you remember Gary Folds. So Gary was in, he was at school with me, and Gary was in chemistry at that time. And actually Gary was taking classes in chemical engineering, and maybe I got the idea from him. So I went and did classes in ChemEng. So then in the end, I kind of got this master's in physical chemistry and this bachelor's in chemical engineering. But then with the master's in physical chemistry, I did a 2-year thesis on, actually it was on chemical precipitation from urine. So, kidney stones precipitate from urine. And so it's like a well-known sort of procedure. You can run a chemical equilibrium model and sort of predict whether solids will precipitate from this chemical solution. And so I did it with Peter Linde at UCT, and we did this model of predicting the precipitation of kidney stones from urine. And so then, okay, I'm doing this, but now I really got to enjoy research. I thought, okay, I enjoy this research. So then I thought, well, I always hear about the United States, and I thought, okay, maybe I could go and do a PhD in the United States. So then I sort of wrote, I don't quite know, I applied, I just got rejected by everyone. And then someone said to me, oh, by the way, there's this professor from the US who's going to come to UCT or something and meet this professor at UCT who was like a wastewater expert in civil engineering at UCT. And so then I actually didn't get to meet him, but then so there was that sort of happened, and then I graduated, with ChemEng, and then I went and got a job in Johannesburg for 2 years as a kind of consulting engineer in a water sort of a water engineering consulting company. So I spent 2 years up there in Johannesburg, but I still had this idea at the back of my mind that I wanted to go to the US to do a PhD. And so then somehow I got hold of this professor from he was from Berkeley, actually, the University of California, Berkeley, which is like a really good university in the US. So somehow I got hold of him. And in the meantime, I had this girlfriend from South Africa, and she'd gone over to Oregon. So she was like living in Oregon. And so I went to Oregon one Christmas, and then both of us, we drove down the highway 101 to California, and we spent some time there. And then I went and met with this guy, Jenkins from Berkeley. And I don't know why, but actually, he'd had like this really good South African student just before then, a really excellent South African student. And there've been, I've heard of lots of good South African students. So he had this good experience with this South African student, and somehow he thought I maybe like this other student. So he said, as I left, he said, "Don't worry, I'm in charge of admissions. I'll admit you," even though I had a bit of a checkered record at UCT. So then, I get accepted to Berkeley. So now I'm all excited, and somehow I told Gary Folds, I'm going to Berkeley to study, and at that point it was called sanitary engineering. So then Gary says to me, "Oh my God, from piss to shit." But anyway, so off I went to UC Berkeley. So wow, this was like a big lucky break for me. If I think back now on how difficult it is to get from South Africa into the academic world in the US. So this guy, I don't know what he saw in me, but he somehow made it possible for me to go to Berkeley. And actually, he didn't take me on as a PhD student himself. He kind of gave me to another professor in a way, and that professor had a project, so I worked with him. And slowly, even though I didn't have funding initially, I sort of bought this like round trip ticket, and I thought, well, I'll show up in Berkeley. I've got like 3 months, and then my trip goes back, my return trip goes back to South Africa. And if I just completely flunk out, I'll just go back, what can I lose, But anyway, somehow I made it and kind of kept going. And so I did a PhD here at Berkeley, and then did a postdoc, and then I got this academic position here at Virginia Tech, which, maybe people haven't really heard much about it, but maybe you've heard of Caltech and Georgia Tech. So then there's Virginia Tech, and we're kind of quite similar to Georgia Tech. And our program, civil and environmental engineering, it's sort of one of the top 10 programs in the US, this US News and World Report. So I've got like fantastic colleagues. So, it's like in the middle of nowhere. It's one of these like land grant universities. So it's sort of designed to be in the middle of nowhere. But, it's been a great, sort of a great career, even though, working in the US has been great. I've traveled a lot everywhere, conferences and that. I've got like fantastic sort of academic colleagues, around the world. I spent sabbaticals in Switzerland, but overall, the US is still not such a great place to live. And so that's why we tried to go to Australia. But anyway, here we are in Blacksburg, Virginia. So that's my story since yeah. So then, I feel like I was incredibly lucky with my family. I had like a great family, and and now at this point in my life, if I look around the people I know and around the world, there's so many families that are sort of broken in a way. I don't know if this is your experience, but so many. Anyway, I had like this really nice family. I've got these 2 older sisters, and so the 2 older sisters are still living in Durbanville, in just outside of Cape Town. And it's a wonderful thing to have this kind of close relationship with a kind of a nice family. So I have a great I just feel like I kind of grew up in this middle class sort of environment. Somehow they sent me to SACS, and actually I sort of said it earlier, but I continue to just be like amazed at how privileged a life we led. I mean, it's just incredible. So I've spent quite a lot of time in China, And, there's this university there, Tsinghua University. And so somehow, by some fluke, I met this guy who was from Tsinghua in the building science. And I've been to China maybe like 15 times, working on research with this guy. So I go there a lot, and Tsinghua University is sort of like the #1 university in China. And like, oh my God, like, do you know how competitive it is to get into that place? And they have the most brilliant students, incredible, and I've had a few of them myself, and they've done incredibly well. And one of them's now back as a professor at Tsinghua. But anyway, the thing I've been like most blown away by was how competitive it is. And then I think back to my own like life. I was just like pushed up, like go to SACS, go to UCT, and like I was hardly even paying attention. I wasn't like trying to compete, I just like sort of somehow floated through this thing, and eventually was like lucky enough to kind of find get into a university here. And in a way, my family like started that whole thing, but they didn't stand out. They were like pretty normal. But it was like I was just lucky to be born into that family in that place. But actually, maybe I can end with one. Maybe I can just end with one kind of story. So if I go back to like junior school, so then I was in the junior school class along with you, I think. And so the one thing I remember was, even though I came from this kind of like fairly normal little family, and I had if I had a birthday, maybe my mother would like buy me a dinky toy or something, But then there were a few of the few people at school, a few of the students at school, who, when they had a birthday, they would ask the entire class to come to their house for a birthday. Like maybe was it Lionel Gerber was maybe like the one that was like the most impressive. And I remember going like with the whole class. It was like quite a nice egalitarian thing. The family invited the whole class, and we all went to Lionel Gerber's house, and they put on like incredible shows, like a magician and all sorts of things. And so I was sort of like quite, like my eyes were opened into how other families, who attended SACS kind of lived, kind of a different kind of story. But however it pans out, wow, I was lucky to grow up in that family and just have life handed to me on a plate.
John, this is,
and I guess to go to school, the whole thing was handed to me on a plate. So no children. My wife, I have a wife who's from South Africa. We never had children. Somehow we put it off and just didn't have children. And so it's sort of but maybe like the one nice thing about the academic job is you have students, like you teach students, you have master students, PhD students, postdocs. So you kind of have this almost like this family in this academic world. And so maybe this is how I find enjoyment, and we don't have our own family. And so, yeah, that's just the way it's